2020 Democratic candidates are pushing hard to impeach the president, and candidate Tom Steyer thinks it's about time. He's already spent millions trying to get impeachment proceedings off the ground. We caught up with him in New York today.
The impeachment inquiry. What is your reaction to the White House's notes on the call?
I've been saying for 2 years this is the most corrupt president in American history. To see in a transcript him ask a foreign country to come to involve themselves in American politics on his behalf at the same time that he's withholding hundreds of millions of dollars of aid to them. Look, I saw absolute wrongdoing, shameless wrongdoing in those transcripts, but it's not news.
Friends, thank you for being here today. We find ourselves at a peculiar moment in American history, a moment where the noise of the headlines often drowns out the signal of reality. If one were to scroll through the digital landscape of social media or glance at the more sensationalized tickers of the 24-hour news cycle, one might be led to believe that the United States government is in the midst of an immediate collapse. There is a prevailing narrative circulating right now that Congress has formally and perhaps violently demanded President Trump's resignation, and that he has defiantly refused a direct ultimatum, pushing the nation to the brink of a constitutional crisis. However, as we settle in to discuss the state of our republic, it is imperative that we look past the smoke to see the fire, or in this case, the lack thereof. The reality is far more complex, more nuanced, and arguably more significant than the dramatic stories of immediate resignation would suggest. The president is indeed refusing to resign, but not because of a dramatic standoff in the Oval Office involving a singular letter from leadership. He is refusing to resign because of a specific calculated assessment of the political mathematics regarding the Constitution and the current makeup of the legislative branch. To understand why the president feels safe enough to ignore the growing explosion of anger in the Capitol, yet privately admits to his own party that his removal is inevitable if the electoral map changes, we must strip away the hyperbole. We must examine the procedural gears of Congress, the specific constitutional arguments regarding the Venezuela operation, and the cold, hard data of the Senate floor. This is not a story about a shouting match. It is a story about the separation of powers, the War Powers Act, and the looming shadow of the 2026 midterms. To see the situation clearly, we must first distinguish the mirage of an ultimatum from the reality of legislative action. Let us begin by addressing the elephant in the room, the explosion within Congress. It is undeniable that the temperature in Washington, D.C. has reached a fever pitch. However, precision in language matters. When we hear that Congress is exploding, we must ask, is this a legislative explosion or a rhetorical one? The prevailing internet rumor suggests that a bipartisan coalition has marched to the White House and demanded President Trump step down immediately or face instant removal. This makes for compelling political theater, reminiscent of the final days of the Nixon administration when Senators Goldwater, Scott, and Rhodes visited the White House to inform the president that his support on the Hill had evaporated. But today, looking at the congressional record, no such Goldwater moment has occurred. There is no joint House-Senate resolution demanding the president's resignation. There is no bipartisan letter signed by leadership from both parties giving him an ultimatum. The explosion we are witnessing is real, but it is fragmented. It is intense, but it is strictly partisan. The anger directed at the president is largely confined to the Democratic caucus. While their fury is genuine and their language, using terms like impeachable, unconstitutional, and lawless, is severe, it does not constitute a unified congressional decree. The Republicans, for the most part, are holding the line. Therefore, the president's refusal to resign is not an act of defiance against a unified government. It is a rejection of the demands of the opposition party. However, to dismiss this as mere partisan bickering would be a grave error. While the public is distracted by the phantom drama of a resignation standoff, House Democrats are quietly, methodically laying the legal groundwork for a process that is very real. Impeachment Round 2. The terminology being utilized in committee hearings and official statements is not accidental. When senior members of the House Judiciary Committee use phrases like abuse of power and unconstitutional overreach, They are drafting the syllabus for future articles of impeachment. They are establishing a record. The danger to the president is not an immediate eviction notice, but rather the construction of a legal cage that is waiting for the political key, a majority vote to lock him in. I'm curious to hear your perspective on this distinction. Do you believe the mainstream media's focus on the drama of resignation rather than the procedure of impeachment is accidental, or is it a deliberate distraction? I'd value your thoughts in the comments below. This brings us to the catalyst of the entire situation, Venezuela and the war powers conflict. To understand the depth of this conflict, we must look beyond the personalities and examine the policy. What exactly has triggered this new wave of constitutional anxiety? It is not merely the president's rhetoric or his management style. It is a specific, tangible action, the unilateral military operation in Venezuela. For the generation that remembers the Vietnam War, the Gulf of Tonkin, and the subsequent passage of the War Powers Resolution of 1973, the current debate resonates on a frequency that is deeply familiar. The Constitution, in its wisdom, divided the powers of war. Article 2 designates the president as commander-in-chief, ensuring a unified chain of command and the ability to repel sudden attacks. However, Article 1 grants Congress, and Congress alone, the power to declare war and the power of the purse. The controversy stems from the allegation that the president has bypassed Article 1 entirely. The accusations are specific, that the administration ordered military action without congressional authorization, that it is withholding aid approved by Congress, and, perhaps most controversially, that the administration has laid claim to the right to run Venezuela and seize control of foreign oil revenues. This is where the debate shifts from political to institutional. For a constitutional conservative or a classic liberal, these allegations are alarming not because of who occupies the White House, but because of what they imply for the office itself. If a president can unilaterally initiate a conflict and seize foreign assets without legislative oversight, the system of checks and balances, the very bedrock of our republic, is fractured. The Democrats arguing that this is an impeachable offense are relying on a strict interpretation of the Constitution. They argue that high crimes and misdemeanors encompasses not just statutory crimes, but abuses of the public trust and the usurpation of power. By allegedly acting as a king rather than a president regarding Venezuela, Trump's critics argue he has breached his oath of office. This is the substantive core of the explosion in Congress, a battle over who holds the ultimate authority to send American sons and daughters into harm's way. This raises a fundamental question for us as citizens. In the modern era, do you believe the president should have the flexibility to act instantly without red tape? Or must we rigidly adhere to the congressional authorization required by the Constitution? Where do you stand on this balance of power? But we cannot rely on rhetoric alone. We must look at the data coming from the silent rebellion in the Senate. While the House provides the volume, the Senate provides the signal. In the lower chamber, rhetoric often runs high, but in the Senate, votes are the only currency that matters. And it is here, in the quiet tabulation of votes, that we find the most damning evidence of the president's precarious position. Amidst the partisan shouting, a significant legislative event occurred that has been largely underreported by the mainstream media, which prefers the spectacle of the fight over the substance of the legislation. The Senate advanced a war powers resolution specifically designed to restrict President Trump's military authority in Venezuela. This was not a symbolic vote by the opposition. A resolution like this requires a majority. In a Senate controlled by Republicans, a Democratic measure should die on the vine. Yet, it passed. The final tally was 52 to 47. This number requires dissection. It means that 5 Republican senators broke rank. Senators Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Rand Paul, Todd Young, and Josh Hawley voted against the president's position. This coalition is fascinating because it is not ideological monolith. You have moderates like Collins and Murkowski who often swing to the center, but you also have Rand Paul and Josh Hawley, conservatives who typically align with the president but hold deep libertarian or non-interventionist views regarding foreign wars. This vote is the smoking gun of congressional pushback. It proves that while there is no demand for resignation, there is a bipartisan consensus that the executive branch has overreached. When a president cannot hold his own party on a matter of national security, his authority is undeniably weakened. The president's reaction to this vote was telling. Rather than engaging with the constitutional concerns raised by senators like Rand Paul, he took to social media to attack them personally, labeling them disloyal and suggesting they should never hold office again. This response reveals the president's mindset. He views constitutional checks and balances not as necessary components of governance, but as personal betrayals. To him, the separation of powers is an impediment to his will, and any Republican who prioritizes Article 1 over Article 2 is an enemy. How do you view these 5 senators who broke rank? Do you see them as betraying their party, or do you see them as fulfilling their constitutional oath to check the executive branch? It is a difficult line to walk, and I would be interested to read your take on their decision. This leads us to the necessary political calculation that explains why he stays. If the anger is so high, and even his own party is voting to restrict his war powers, why does Trump refuse to resign? Why does he not feel the pressure that Nixon felt in 1974? The answer lies in the cold, unyielding math of the U.S. Constitution regarding impeachment. The Founding Fathers made removing a president intentionally difficult. It requires 2 distinct steps, each with a different threshold. First, the House of Representatives must vote to impeach. This requires a simple majority, 50% plus 1. This is the equivalent of an indictment. Second, the Senate must hold a trial and vote to convict and remove. This requires a supermajority, 2/3 of the Senate, or 67 votes. Currently, Republicans hold the majority in both chambers, or at least a blocking position in the House. As long as that partisan wall holds, impeachable offenses remain a theoretical concept rather than a practical threat. Trump knows this. He understands that without a Democratic majority in the House, articles of impeachment cannot even be introduced to the floor for a vote. Furthermore, even if the House were to flip, the Senate remains a fortress. Getting to 67 votes would require not just 5 Republicans like in the War Powers vote, but nearly 20 Republicans to vote for removal. In today's polarized environment, where primary voters punish dissent severely, that number is statistically improbable. Therefore, the president's refusal to resign is a rational political calculation. He is safe because the votes simply aren't there. The explosion is loud, but the walls of his fortress, built on partisan loyalty and the high threshold of the Constitution, remain intact. Yet, beneath the surface, there is a critical admission that was made during the January 6th retreat. However, bravado is often a mask for anxiety. While the president projects invincibility to the public and defiance to the press, his private communications with his party reveal a very different reality. We must turn our attention to a specific and rather ironic event, the GOP retreat held on January 6, 2026. The date itself, the anniversary of the Capitol riot, adds a layer of historical weight to the conversation. It was here, behind closed doors, away from the cameras and the rallies, that President Trump delivered a message to House Republicans that was stark in its honesty. His message was unequivocal. If we lose the midterms, I will be impeached. Note the phrasing. He did not say he might be impeached. He did not say the Democrats would try to impeach him. He said he will be impeached. This is a profound admission. Implicit in this statement is the acknowledgement that the grounds for impeachment exist. He is not arguing that he is innocent of the charges regarding Venezuela or the abuse of power. He is arguing that his innocence is irrelevant compared to his political protection. He is effectively telling his caucus, the only thing standing between me and a trial is your ability to win an election. This reveals that the president is fully aware of the legal jeopardy he is in. He understands that the paper trail created by the House Democrats regarding Venezuela is sufficient to trigger proceedings the moment the gavel changes hands. His refusal to resign is not based on a belief in his own immunity, but on a reliance on his party's political survival. His fate and the fate of the Republican majority are now inextricably linked. He needs them to save him. They need his base to save them. It is a relationship of mutual necessity born of political peril. We must also consider the profound constitutional stakes that extend far beyond the political fate of a single administration. To fully grasp the gravity of this standoff, we must take a moment to step back from the immediate partisan brawl and examine the potential structural damage being done to the American presidency itself. What we are witnessing regarding the Venezuela operation and the subsequent refusal to resign is not merely a policy dispute. It is a stress test of the unitary executive theory pushed to its absolute limit. For decades, scholars and historians have warned of the imperial presidency, the gradual accumulation of power in the executive branch at the expense of the legislative branch. But the current situation presents a scenario that is uniquely dangerous in its specifics. The allegation is not just that the president deployed troops without permission, something presidents have done from Truman in Korea to Clinton in Kosovo, but that the administration has effectively claimed the authority to administer a foreign nation's economy and seize its revenue streams without congressional oversight. If the president successfully navigates this crisis without facing formal rebuke or resignation, simply because the opposition lacks the votes for impeachment, it establishes a new and potent precedent. It signals to future occupants of the Oval Office, Democrat or Republican, that the War Powers Resolution is effectively a dead letter. It suggests that Article 1's power of the purse can be circumvented if the executive branch simply acts with enough speed and audacity. This creates a constitutional twilight zone, where actions are widely recognized as illegal or unconstitutional by legal experts and even members of the president's own party, as seen in the Senate vote, yet remain operational because the political mechanism for enforcement, impeachment, is paralyzed by polarization. This is the nightmare scenario for strict constitutionalists. A president who rules not by law, but by the inability of Congress to stop him. Furthermore, this dynamic traps the Republican Party in a sophisticated dilemma. Many traditional conservatives in Congress are deeply uncomfortable with the expansion of executive power. They spent the Obama years arguing against executive overreach, yet they find themselves in a position where checking the president's power regarding Venezuela requires handing a political victory to the Democrats, a victory that could cost them their own seats in a primary. The president is banking on this trap. He is wagering that GOP loyalty to the team is stronger than their loyalty to the institution of Congress. By refusing to resign and forcing his party to shield him, he is effectively asking Republican lawmakers to diminish their own power. He is asking them to accept that the president, not Congress, dictates foreign policy and war. This erosion of norms is subtle but cumulative. Each time a soft guardrail of democracy, like the expectation that a president respects a bipartisan rebuke, is ignored without consequence, the system becomes more brittle. The explosion in Congress is the sound of these guardrails straining under pressure. The danger isn't just that Trump stays in office. The danger is that the office itself is fundamentally altered, transforming from a co-equal branch of government into a superior one, unchecked by anything other than the raw math of an electoral calendar. Before we conclude, I want to ask you, do you believe the imperial presidency has gone too far, regardless of which party is in power? Is this a trend we can reverse? Or is it the new normal? Please share your wisdom in the comments. Ultimately, this entire saga pivots to 2026, which will deliver the true verdict. So, where does this leave us, the citizens observing this high-stakes drama? We must conclude that the video title, while dramatic, frames the wrong question. The question is not, why won't he resign? The question is, what happens in November 2026? The current explosion in Congress is best understood as a pressure cooker rather than a bomb. The pressure is building through hearings, through War Powers resolutions, through the slow accumulation of evidence and testimony. But there is no release valve available in the current legislative session. The Republican majority has clamped the lid down tight. However, elections have consequences. The 2026 midterm elections are shaping up to be a referendum not just on policy, but on the presidency itself. If the Republicans hold the House, the pressure cooker remains sealed. The investigations may continue, but they will lack teeth. The president will remain protected, and the constitutional questions regarding Venezuela will likely go unanswered, setting a precedent for future executives to expand their war powers even further. If the Democrats flip the House, the lid comes off. The impeachable offenses that are currently just talking points will transform into formal articles of impeachment. The constitutional arguments regarding the War Powers Act will move from the abstract to the floor of the Senate. The will in Trump's warning to his party will become a prophecy fulfilled. Friends, the noise in Washington is distracting, but we must remain focused on the mechanics of our democracy. The president is not worried about a resignation letter today. He knows that no sergeant at arms is coming to escort him from the White House this week. He is worried about the ballot box in November. That is where the true verdict on his presidency will be delivered. It will not be delivered by a cable news pundit, nor by a screaming headline, nor even by a frustrated senator. It will be delivered by you, the voter. In the quiet sanctity of the voting booth, the American people will decide whether the explosion in Congress leads to a change in leadership or whether the current course is ratified for another 2 years. Until then, we watch, we analyze, and we wait. The Constitution is being tested, stress-tested in real time. Whether it bends or breaks depends entirely on the will of the electorate in the coming cycle. As we look toward 2026, do you see the electorate swinging back to check the president, or do you believe the current course will be reaffirmed? I look forward to reading your predictions. Thank you for your time and for your commitment to understanding the deeper truths of our republic.